Lester, WuShu engineer. Well, I guess during this first introduction to our video for today, I suppose that there's quite a lot of clarification to the title of the video that I need to make. I suppose it really comes down to definitions, how you define various things, and what you understand by various terms and concepts. But first of all, I'll tell you a little story about myself and what I was looking for, and what I found in the system that I currently practice. And while self-defense and martial arts has always been of interest to me, by far I would say probably my most profound interest has always been in transcending human limitations in various ways, whether it's mental or physical or in any other way, to actually push the boundaries of what we can do, what we can think, what we can conceive of. And I suppose that is in a way what I found in the system. And believe me when I say that I was looking for a path for to kind of at least some kind of doorway into this for a very long time. And I considered a lot of things. And for many people growing up in my generation, who were heavily into the physical strength and fitness scene, as I was, 20 odd years ago now, actually more like 30 years ago now, we considered a lot of different things. And there was a stage when I actually considered things like steroid use, etc., to achieve something that was beyond what my genetic potential was. Because I learned very early on that my genetic potential was not huge, and that was always a point that frustrated me a lot. At least in terms of physical performance, my genetic potential is not great, not massive. So I did consider taking steroids at one stage. That was obviously a very long time ago. I didn't do it. There were a lot of other things I considered as well, and none of them, in the end, none of them really caught my attention. But it was around about that time that I came in contact with the system that I'm currently in, and the system offered an internal pathway to transcending certain physical and mental human limitations. And so I started training within the system, and that was now over 20 years ago. So I've been in the system for over 20 years. Prior to that, obviously, I'd been doing a lot of other things, including doing other different types of martial arts, looking for what I ultimately found here. So I said this was going to come down to a few definitions, and I suppose one of the things that we should define first of all is what is something that is superhuman. Turning to Wikipedia, and you can look it up yourself on Wikipedia. I kind of like the transhumanist kind of definition of what superhuman is, and Wikipedia says in transhumanism and futurology, superhuman abilities are the technological aim either of human enhancement by genetic modification or cybernetic implants or future superhuman artificial intelligence. Now, in the same Wikipedia article, it also, defines what human enhancement is. And the definition of human enhancement is any attempt to temporarily or permanently overcome the current limitations of the human body through natural or artificial means. I quite like that definition because it doesn't preclude a natural path to transcendence, to be able to transcend human physical and mental limitations. And I suppose that I also need to define what chi is within the system that I practice. And while qi is a great many things to a great many people, and everyone has a different take and interpretation of it, and there are a lot of claims made about qi, many of which are quite clearly spurious. I believe that it is a very real phenomenon, and it's actually one of the phenomena that we are studying and researching at the Martial Arts Research and Testing Laboratory, Martel. In fact, it is. You could say that it's one of the founding reasons for its for the creation of Martel, is actually to come to the bottom of what qi really is. And so, to cut a long story short, although the concept of qi has a lot of philosophical, historic implications within Eastern culture, it is also, I believe, and we believe at the Chinese Martial Arts and Health Center, a very physical process, a system of doing things, or let's say a physiological effect that can achieve certain results, real, measurable, real-world results. So not just some kind of airy-fairy kind of stuff. And if you search for qi on YouTube, you're going to find a lot of videos, and unfortunately, many of those videos are really just tricks. So that's the unfortunate truth. Wherever you have a phenomena that's not been properly scientifically documented, you will have a whole bunch of charlatans and showmen coming in to essentially to milk the confusion and ignorance for their own benefit. So you'll see people spinning little compasses in glass jars, and you'll see people setting little bits of paper on fire, apparently using qi magic, and you'll see people doing all kinds of bizarre things with qi. I don't believe that. I believe that most of that is complete nonsense, and actually quite many of the tricks are actually, for instance, the qi compass is actually just based on thermal convection currents being created within the glass vessel because of the heat of the practitioner's hand. Little things like that. It's trickery, and in fact, many of the people who are actually doing these things are not even aware that they are tricks. That it's not actually some kind of supernatural phenomenon that they're seeing, that they're doing. And that's another thing that I'd like to state about qi: qi is not supernatural at all. It is a purely physical, natural, and measurable phenomenon. It's just very subtle, and it requires a lot, awful lot, of training in order to get it to do anything that is measurable in the real world. In the methodology section of this video, I'll get into some more detail about what qi is, but basically, as far as we at Martel and the Chinese Martial Arts and Health Australia is concerned, qi is essentially hydrostatic pressure differentials within the human body, created and controlled within the intra-abdominal cavities, and then communicated to your extremities, your hands, your legs, your feet, wherever, through the medium of various fluid-filled spaces in the human body, including the organ that they have only recently discovered, which is the interstitium. And I'll turn to the Wikipedia article on interstitium again, just to rattle off what Wikipedia has to say about it. The interstitium is a contiguous fluid-filled space existing between the skin and the body organs, including muscles and the circulatory system. The fluid in this space, called interstitial fluid, is composed of extracellular fluid and its solutes. It drains into the lymph system. The interstitial compartment is composed of connective and supportive tissues within the body called the extracellular matrix that are situated outside the blood and lymphatic vessels and the parenchyma of organs. The structure of the interstitium is the morphology of the interstitium is composed of collagen types 1, 3, and 5, elastin, and ooh, that's a long word. Glycosaminoglycans. I hope I got that right. Such as hyaluronate and proteoglycans. Fortunately, we don't have to pronounce these in order to use them. That are cross-linked to form a honeycomb-like reticulum. Such structural components exist both for the general interstitium of the body and within individual organs such as the heart and kidney. So essentially, what you could think of within the human body is that there's a secondary system of control and force generation that exists within the skeletal muscles in the human body, and can be manipulated and controlled through manipulating and controlling the pressure within the intra-abdominal cavities. So if you like, you have the skeletal muscles, which are conventionally assumed to be doing all of the work, but then on top of that, or I should say more underneath that, you have this secondary, I wouldn't call it a musculature, it's more like it's just this fluid-filled space, which can be used to, let's say, amplify what you can do with your skeletal muscles. Well, now that was a whole mouthful, but obviously there's a lot of explanation that needs to occur, and of course a lot of what I'm saying has not yet been scientifically proven or studied. We're in process, okay? It is happening. It just hasn't happened quite yet. But to get to what I'm going to do in this video, I am a middle-aged man. I have been physically training for a very long time. We've been training for upwards of 30 years now. As I said, over 20 years in my chosen system of martial arts. And although physical training does play a significant role in my training, I don't do a lot of conventional strength training. In this video, I am going to attempt to use my control of Qi, which I do also have to add that my understanding and control of these internal structures and this system, if you like, is at a very, very much of almost like you could say a beginning level. I'm really only scratching the surface of what can be done with this system. Within my system of martial arts, there are far more people who are at a far higher level of control and understanding than I am. So, but that said, I can still do things with it. So I'm going to do something today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to use my Qi, my internal control, to amplify the amount of force that I can produce in a particular isometric hold. And the isometric hold or push that I'm going to use is a standing chest press. And I'm going to use to measure the standing chest pressure, I'm going to have my back essentially against a load cell, and I'm going to be pushing against a bar. But I'm not going to be pushing at full extension, which is going to give me a significant advantage. If for those of you who are familiar with strength training, you'll know that as your arms and your legs start moving out to full extension, your ability to generate force ramps up quite rapidly. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have my arms with my elbows at least 90 degrees, so at a mechanically disadvantageous angle. And from that angle, from that position, I'm going to attempt to exert maximal force. And we'll see what happens. We'll see what I can do using my understanding of the physiological phenomenon known as Qi. And what I'm trying to prove in this video is not anything scientifically, not anything scientific. This is very subjective, but I'm trying to establish that it is possible. I believe that it is possible to actually exceed your genetic potential using this natural system that is locked away within the human body. And as I was saying earlier, I'm a middle-aged man. I'm 44 this year. I don't bench press, so I don't actually do the bench press exercise. In fact, the last time that I did a bench press was possibly as much as 10 years ago. So this is not an exercise. I don't do the only exercises that are similar to this that I do are body weight type exercises like push-ups. Okay, so don't and as you can no doubt tell, I'm in reasonable shape, but I'm very obviously not a bodybuilder. Okay, so don't think for a second that I'm somehow some kind of secret Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson underneath this jacket. I'm certainly not. I'm 44 years old. As I said, I'm in good shape. I do train a lot. I train somewhere around between 30 and 40 hours a week. But by far the greater majority of that is actually to do with the Qigong training that we do, which is internal training, breathing, meditation, as well as form work, which is of course is like a series of katas that we do, and in combination with various forms of sparring, bag work, and as I said, I do physical training, so there is a physical component to my training, but the hard physical component to my training is perhaps only 20 to 30% of my entire training load. So we'll see what I can do, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions about whether that's significantly different to what you would expect or not. I'll see you in the methodology section. Welcome to the methodology section. I hope you can see the whiteboard. I might have to think about trying something else to sort of draw things up next time. But hopefully you can see this, and this time I'll try not to get my butt in the way. So this is not going to be that long. Very briefly, I was talking about the internal structures to the human body that we use to produce various effects in traditional martial arts. And I'm just going to briefly go over that. This is Chi 101, if you'd like. So basically, within traditional Chinese martial arts, there are three centers that we are quite interested in learning how to control and map within the human brain. So, if you could think of it as essentially creating a set of virtual organs within the human body that send and receive information from the brain. So they're not really what you would call organs, as in that was how we were born with them. They are structures within the body, but through training, through rigorous training, you can essentially map them together in the human brain and create like this collaboration of parts of the human body that wouldn't necessarily automatically be working together to produce an end result. And that's the way that I like to think of it. So the centers that we're interested in are what we call the lower dantian, the mid dantian, and the upper dantian. The upper dantian is located within the skull and is more to do with intention and will and direction of your activity, whereas the mid dantian and the lower dantian are parts that are used to store, control, and manipulate qi. And by far the foundation of the system is actually the lower dantian, which is most important. And the lower dantian is actually associated with the pelvic cavity. So this is the pelvic cavity bound by various muscular structures and bands. The mid-dantian bound by the diaphragm and also being affected by the structure in the pelvic cavity. And of course you have the chest cavity, the thoracic cavity above, which we don't necessarily use for manipulating pressure levels in the body because it's actually pneumatic, whereas these are more fluid-filled spaces that has a lot of air within it due to the lungs, and the lungs are not considered good for generating chi. That's more of a yin organ. So these structures are used to breathe. They're used to initiate the breathing process, but it is not actually breath that we are using when we are creating chi. What we are using is actually the pressure that we generate in the fluid-filled spaces in the body, communicated to the extremities via I believe, by the interstitium. No, this is not anatomically correct. Sorry about that. So very briefly, the methodology is quite simple. I'm going to be using the load cell that we have access to through the Martial Arts Research and Testing Laboratory, which I'll show you a bit later in the equipment section. I'm going to be pushing against a short bar, and the short bar is going to be attached to the back of the load cell by a set of short chains. Once again, to keep my elbows below or below 90 degrees, so that I don't have a mechanical advantage that I can rely on to generate force. So that's basically the methodology. We're going to set that all up. We're going to test it, see what happens, and see if there is some statistically significant difference from what you might expect from someone of my age and physical activity. Okay, I'll see you in the equipment section. Welcome to the equipment section of the video. This is, I'll quickly go over the short bar and chain arrangement that we're going to be using. So obviously not a very long bar, so not a great deal of space for me to create a triangular structure with my arms to increase the efficiency of my force. It's very close into my shoulders, and my hold is going to be at a mechanically disadvantageous position with the elbows out at 90 degrees. These chains get connected to a series, two connection points behind the load cell, and then from there I will be pushing against the load cell on using this bar to push back with. The load cell is a lodestar sensor. In fact, the very same sensor, their boxing kit that was used in the one Mythbusters episode, where they investigated what it would take to punch your way out of a paper bag. Mythbusters is one of my favorite programs. So this is the sensor we're going to be using. It's going to be connected via USB cable through to this computer, which will be in real time. It'll be tracking the force that I produce in newtons on a graph, which can then actually be downloaded and analyzed in a lot of detail. But we're not going to do a detailed analysis of it. We're really just going to take a screenshot of it once it's done, and from there we'll extrapolate some very basic results. This is not an exhaustive scientific investigation. This is just a subjective, very basic experiment. And I shall see you in the testing stage.
Okay, press start. Just wait 1 second. And push. Push, 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 push.
Where did that go?
1651.
1651.
1651.
Well, welcome to the conclusion section of the video. Well, that was quite interesting. I had hoped to do a little bit better than that, but still, I believe a significant result anyway, and we'll discuss it in further detail. Don't be intimidated by the wall of words or try to read my handwriting. I'll interpret it for you. First of all, I'd just like to say that what I just did was not a bench press or a chest press. It was, at best, what you could describe it as is an isometric chest press or isometric chest press hold, where I'm essentially stationary, just exerting force in a particular position. So the figures and the tables that we provided earlier in the preceding section are tables of bench press statistics. They were given to provide a context for the force that I was able to generate, nothing more than that. So the peak force that I was able to generate was 1,651 newtons, which equates to about 168 kilograms, which is, I think, from memory, somewhere around 370 pounds, which is about twice my body weight. I weigh about 82 kilograms. And the way that I generated that was significantly different to a conventional approach to generating force. As I explained in the earlier sections, what I was attempting to use was a system which has sort of a catch-all heading, which is chi, and that is really a form of very refined internal control of pressure differentials through the body. I'd also like to say that I'm not some kind of special case. There's nothing special about me. I'm a product of a system of training. I don't have any kind of significant genetic advantage over anybody. I'd also like to say that my result is not actually what you would call human peak performance, because the current raw bench press record is about 335 kilograms, which is considerably higher than the force that I was able to produce in this hold. But my question to you is this really peak human performance after all? If I direct your attention back to the previous sections, the introduction, where I was talking about what you can define superhuman as, the Wikipedia article is a good place to start, but you could really define any kind of enhanced human being as a superhuman, and you may even consider exceeding your own genetic potential as superhuman. And of course, the Wikipedia article defines human enhancement as any attempt to temporarily or permanently overcome the current limitations of the human body through natural or artificial means. And I also mentioned, on a personal note, that there was a time when, long ago now, when I did consider taking steroids and other doping supplements to enhance my performance. And currently, there's some sources online that state that perhaps as much as 95% of professional athletes use steroids, and as high as 0.5% of the general population may actually be using steroids. That's 1 in 200 people. Now, for a small town like Toowoomba, which has roughly 200,000 people, that's 1,000 people potentially on steroids. And of course, when we look at the environment from which the figures and tables for the bench press statistics that we gave earlier, the environment from which they were taken, they would have been developed in gyms. And of course, in amongst gym goers, what is the percentage of people who are using some form of physical enhancement, doping or steroids or that? I'd say that the percentage is probably significantly higher. So
whether you could really argue that 335 kilograms is actually peak human performance, or whether it is actually superhuman in its own right. It's another question, and not really something that I'm going to get into in this video. But I'll leave it up to you to make your mind up as to whether my result was something significant. I believe that it is, and as I said, I have experience within the conventional context. That's where I came from. My training was originally conventional, and by being introduced into the system that I'm currently actually in, it opened up a new avenue to investigate in terms of how to actually do certain things, and it's not even limited only to creating force or static force. It affects everything that I'm doing within my own personal training at the moment. And how can that be of assistance to someone from a conventional perspective or conventional approach? I believe that it can. And who knows what the what the limits of this system are? I don't. But I'm interested in finding out, and hopefully in future videos we can explore that a little bit in a bit more detail. So this has been Lester, WuShu Engineer. I hope you enjoyed that video. Leave a comment below. All right, cheers.